So one of the things that my bio doesn't say, and I'm really glad to be here, by the way, is that my middle name is Aaron. And true story. And you cannot imagine how traumatic it was to realize at my age that I had been saying my middle name wrong this entire time. But I'm straightened out, and I'm really, I'm just happy to be a part of ISI, because what ISI has is people that are hungry to grow and to learn. And I've been a part of a handful of networking and peer organizations. And ISI is unique. You have a unique culture, and I think it's just beginning, and I'm super excited to be a part of that. I want to be talking to you today about mentoring. And I've been fortunate in my life. I had a father who was a very intentional mentor, and I also had somebody in my business life that was a very intentional mentor. And you know, it's been said, and today I'm going to talk a little bit in the business context, but not entirely, you know, because many of us have hustles, we have things, we have companies that we're running, and it's been said that the problem with capitalism is the capitalists. And I think that can be true many times, but I had a mentor who taught me that in God's world, business done right is a blessing. And that was actually his life mantra. But I want to take the opening few minutes here, and I want to talk a little bit about the framework, the environment we operate in, which is the environment of capitalism. You know, when we hear people talking about socialists, this and that, you know, our hairs go up the back of our neck. We're like, that's not right, right? So early capitalism was really about traditional gathering, sharing. It was around subsistence. If I'm cold, you've got a blanket, I might trade you some of the food that I have so that you can eat, and we just work it out. It was embedded in capitalism that we look out for each other. But then along came modern capitalism, where things like the steam engine and the Industrial Revolution, and people started getting in factories, and then banking and finance, and people began to look at capitalism as an economic model. In fact, the Scottish moral philosopher believed that capitalism devoid of morals could actually be destructive. The father of modern capitalism, Adam Smith. And he taught many things that in today's world we would think, God, that kind of sounds a little bit socialistic. Things like, you know, a minimum wage should be enough that a man can care for his family. Right. And he taught that, you know, it's not necessarily healthy that all the wealth aggregates up to the crown or to any one individual. Ideas like it's actually a little bit vulgar to have more than you could ever use. See, we hear those things now, and it starts to challenge us a bit, because modern capitalism continued to move. And Milton Friedman was a Nobel Prize-winning economist out of the Chicago School, and he had something he's famous for called the Friedman Doctrine. And he basically said, the one and only goal of a company is to make profit. But things keep moving. You see, many people think that we are now in an era that's postmodern capitalism, where we have a capitalism that's completely detached from any of these underpinning values that hold it together. And so we're in an era where it's ruggedly, extremely individualistic. That's what we see. We live in a world of reality TV where we're poisoned by comparison. And many people think that what drives the economy in this world now is conspicuous consumption. It's how do I get things so that I have a feeling when other people see me with these things. And so we're questioning, what are our obligations towards each other? Because in the early days, it was capitalism for the common good. As my mentor taught, in God's world, business done right should be a blessing. And so there's cultural confusion out there about what our obligations are to each other. And this isn't a new thing, but it is a manifestation in a new way. If you look in Genesis chapter 4, there's a story about the first murder, and it's one brother rising up against another brother because of envy. It was Cain killing Abel. And God comes calling, and he calls to Cain. He says, Cain, where's your brother? And Cain's famous response, am I my brother's keeper? We still wrestle with that. If you want to see a cringeworthy interview, look up the words Brett Favre mentor someday. And you'll see he posed the question in an interview. He said, is it my job to mentor the next generation? I thought I was brought here to win games. Clearly that's a reference to Aaron Rodgers. So we are in this area where we say, am I my brother's keeper? What are my obligations? So on one side, those of us that have accomplished a little bit are saying, what are my obligations? On the other side, what I want to talk to you about this morning is the other generation that is a wide-eyed rookie coming into the league, and they're saying, where's my mentor? Many people don't even believe that you can find a mentor. We're very fortunate in ISI. We're fortunate. We don't believe that. But many people don't believe that. Just this week, I saw an article in Forbes or Fast Company or something where somebody was basically saying, get over the notion that you'll ever have a mentor. You just need to go do your thing. You learn here, you learn there. I disagree with that. I think there are mentors that we can find if we know how to look for them. And I want to talk a little bit about how to do that. So the first thing is, let's talk about what the word mentor even means. You know, to me, a mentor isn't a coach. A coach, short term, it's about a season, it's about getting something done. A guru is somebody who's got a lot of great wisdom, but you may not get a walk with them. A teacher? I think teachers are about exchanging information and making sure you understand that, but we've got a lot of information in the information age. See, I think a mentor is something more than that. For me, the word that most closely explains to me what a mentor is a guide. It's somebody that is going to walk with you for an extended period of time. And so those of us that have kind of grown up in a church environment, we've heard about discipleship, we've heard about disciples and discipling, but we don't really have a clue what that is because that word is cloaked in religious imagery. We don't know if it's a program, it's an institution, where do I sign up for that, or what does that look like? It's almost a useless word for most of us. If we were to replace the word disciple or discipleship with mentoring and mentor, think about the difference that would make, because a mentor is somebody that will guide you through life's most important decisions. And that's what this generation is crying out for. They're saying, where's my mentor and who can I trust with life's most important decisions? Decisions like, in today's world, should I even go to college? If I go to college, what should I study and why? Questions like, is she the right one for me? Is now the right time to buy a house? When do I know it's time to quit my job? As you get a little older, how do I deal with menopause in the household? How do I care for an aging parent? I mean, these are real topics, real decisions with life consequences that we treasure having people that can mentor us through those difficult seasons of life. Ultimately, we got to make the decision, but how much easier is that decision if we have a mentor? So I want to talk to you about the characteristics of a mentor. I really believe that there are 4 core characteristics. I like to call them the core 4 characteristics of a mentor. The first one is kind of a gating factor. They've got to have experience that they're willing to share with you. How often have we taken advice from people that in retrospect we look and say, why did I listen to them? They're clueless. I've made many business decisions based on anecdotal feedback from people that I got to know after a while, and I'm like, that guy's a flake. Why did I value his information so highly? Because I didn't have a test to run him through. So they need to have experience. If you're a specialist, obviously you're seeking somebody that's an authority in that position. They've further down a path that you want to travel. That's the kind of experience you're looking for. I want to be like them. It may be specialized knowledge, but it may be just the way they treat their wife or the way they plan intentionally for mentoring their children. They've got something that you want to replicate. They're further down a road you'd like to go. And the second part of that characteristic is, and they're willing to share it. Because there are many people in this world who have that kind of experience, the valuable insights, but they're too caught up in their own achievements. They're too caught up in their own stuff to really do what comes next and what is necessary. And that is point number 2, is they've got to be willing to get to know you. See, I don't believe that people online can truly be a mentor because it's a one-to-many environment. They can be helpful. They can be many different things. But I think a mentor is somebody that's willing to take the time to get to know you. And so that means they know your strengths. They know your weaknesses. They know your tendencies. They know your history. Many times they start to know your ambitions, they know your dreams, and they begin to partner with you as you set for yourself a dream that's realistic. And they can have input into that dreaming process because they actually know you. And in the process of getting to know you, something else happens, is that you actually get to know them. And so in order for a mentor to be effective in your life, you've got to trust them. And that process of rubbing shoulders, of rolling up your sleeves and sitting down together and breaking bread, it just takes time. And a true mentor is going to take the time to get to know you. The third characteristic of a mentor, and this is one I learned the hard way, was they've got to love you. You know, sometimes we get very wrapped around the axle with the way people are thinking and feeling about us. Maybe we have a major conflict, which was the case for me, and I realized I was agonizing over what this person was thinking and feeling and maybe even saying about me. And then it hit me. Seth, this guy doesn't even like you. Certainly doesn't love you. You have an obligation to let that go. And I began to flip that in reverse and say, I should only be taking advice for the most important issues in life from people who love me. And somebody that loves you is going to have no agenda. They're going to have no conflicts of interest. Their only motivation in speaking to you is love and getting the best out of you. And somebody that loves you is going to tell you hard truths, but they're going to tell you those hard truths solely for the purpose of building you up and never for the purpose of manipulating you or moving you towards an area that they want you to move. So why would we take advice for life's most important decisions from somebody with no experience, from somebody who doesn't know us, from somebody who doesn't love us? Yet we do it more often than we'd like. And the last core characteristic of a mentor is they need to share your values. Because I've found that it's possible to have people who have experience, who know you and love you, but they still don't share your values. They're playing by a different playbook. Perhaps you're a rabid environmentalist and they are a logging industrialist. Or perhaps the most important thing in your life is your marriage and your family, and they have an open marriage. Perhaps they believe that the goal in life is to acquire and protect, and you believe that the goal in life is to be faithful to God over the long run, whatever that looks like. And so as you wrestle with this worldview, it becomes very important to have a mentor that actually shares your values. And for many of us in the early stages, quite frankly, we don't know what our values are. So that sharing of values, when we know what they are, it's pretty easy to say that person doesn't share them. But as we're forming them, we have to be careful because the mentoring relationship is actually the opportunity to have your values shaped. And I love that about this group as I see people wrestling through, sharpening their values. So the 4 core characteristics of a mentor: they need to have experience that they're willing to share. They need to be willing to know you. They need to demonstrate that they love you. And the last one is they need to share your values. I want to talk a little bit about Jesus as the ideal mentor, and I just want to think about him as the model. Did he have experience? Yeah. The Bible teaches us that nothing was made without him being involved in it. He had authority From the early ages when he stepped in the scene and he was teaching in the temples, they said, this one speaks as somebody who has authority. You think? But you'll notice that back half, and he was willing to share it. In fact, that was the mission. His mission was to share the experience that he had. Imagine if Jesus hit 30 years old and he says, I know all the best places in the world. I think I'm going to take these next 3 years and I'm going to go find myself. We'd be up a creek. But from day one, he was all about reaching out and sharing everything he had. That was the mission. And think about what he did next with the second point. Did he know those around him? Sure he did. He had concentric rings of relationships. He had 3 people, Peter, James, and John, he kept really close. He had 12. He called them their Mastermind. And no, they didn't call him the 12th disciple. But he had 12. And they were the original Mastermind. And they did everything with him. And then he had their friends and family. And then he had the crowds. And then he had those that would come generations. So there was concentric rings. And as you read the Gospels and you see how Jesus spent his time, he spent his time rubbing shoulders, doing life with those that were going to take his message of redemption to the rest of the world. And did he love them? Yeah, he loved them. In fact, the gospel itself is that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have eternal life. We know even people that don't have faith will say, greater love has no man than he laid down his life for his friends. Jesus modeled that kind of love with these men. He told them hard truths. He called them. He walked with them, and he showed them what it was like to lay himself down. And did he share their values? It's interesting. He did share their values. They were in a Jewish culture that was steeped in tradition. And when he talked to them from the context of things they understood. He says, your book you read says, don't commit adultery, right? And they go, uh-huh. He goes, I say, don't even look at a woman lustfully. And they said, oh, okay. And so he was giving them practical application of the values they already had, but showing them how it plays out in the real world. And of course, he was shaping their values through this entire time. And so a little bit later, as I finish towards the end, I want to talk about how he mentored one guy in particular, Peter. And we've already heard a little bit about Peter over this weekend. So once you find a mentor, there's a whole way of building real relationships with them. And we can talk more about that later. Don't have enough time for that today. But I also think that there's another layer of mentoring that is this right here. That's peer mentoring. I think it's very important to find a mentor, but I also think it's very important to find a peer networking group. I'm preaching to the choir on this one because you guys are here. You've discovered that. But I also want to say that you only get in or you get out what you put in. And so one of the things that we're learning to do together, and we experienced this last night with this duct tape exercise, is you're learning to get real, right? Because a peer mentoring group where you don't get real isn't very effective. There's something else that we need to learn to do, and I think Aaron does a tremendous job of this, is we need to learn to throw the flag on each other. We live in a world that we don't want to get involved in other people's mess. Back to that is, am I my brother's keeper? Is it my job to get involved in his drama? I got plenty of my own. Actually, think about how many times you've seen something in somebody's life and you thought, that doesn't make sense, and you didn't say something. And then 3 months later, 6 months later, it blows up and you're like, I knew it. That is when we need to throw the flag. You need to care enough. You need to love your brother enough to call him out, to say, hey, I may be totally off base, but how many times have you done that and actually had somebody say, doesn't resonate at all? Never. We need to be willing to throw the flag. Scripture teaches us this is a huge part of walking towards what God has for us. Hebrews 10:24 says, continue gathering yourselves together so that you can encourage each other towards love and good works, stirring it up. That's what we do when we get together like this. We stir it up in a way to encourage each other towards love and towards good works. And so the last part I want to talk about today is it's time for us to be very intentional about becoming the mentor that we wish we had. That's the mission here, guys. Become the mentor we wish we had. And I want to give you some practical tips, and I want to give you a challenge to go out and do that. The first thing is, you need to be willing to trade your freedom for impact. In the solopreneur world, in the entrepreneur world, we can have this vision of what life looks like, and it's a carefree life on the golf course. Is that the model that Jesus showed us? He was willing to trade his freedom for impact. We need to be willing to do that. So the first thing is, we look at our experience, and are we willing to share it? And we need to learn to walk in our authority. Whatever level of authority you have, walk in it. As it's been said, what's ordinary to us is extraordinary for others. We are often so focused on achieving our goals and getting ours and growing to our own potential that we are stepping right over the people that God has put in our life who look up to us to be their mentor. We have people that are 10 steps behind us that think we hung the moon, and we're so focused on our own stuff that we don't take time to interrupt our ambition to take care of them. The other thing we do is we discount the authority that we have because we see all of our weaknesses and mistakes and sins. We need to learn to be comfortable in our authority. You know, we're pretty good at defending against ego, right? So if your potential is this vision down the road and there's ditches on either side, one ditch is ego and pride. And we're actually pretty good at keeping that one under control. And if not, we're married. We have a wife who does that for us. But often the other side of the ditch is this false humility and fear where we won't take risks because we're discounting ourselves too far. Don't underestimate the authority you have, and then find ways to communicate to others that I'm available, I'm willing, I'm called to share the authority that I have. That's how we share our experience. The second one is getting to know them. How do we demonstrate to people that we get to know them? Time. Time. As a good mentor, we got to be willing to put in the time. It's got to have parameters, it's got to have boundaries, it's got to have guardrails, but there's no excuse, or there's no other way to do it without the time. Then how do we show people that we love them? You know, we got to learn to confront those issues. We got to learn to speak the truth in love. And then the last piece of sharing our values. We've got to get clear on what those values are before we can share them. You know what? Many times we end up repeating the same stuff over and over, and to us we're like, I already covered that. But we didn't cover it for them. That's a big issue for me. I don't like to repeat myself, and I'm learning. Get over it. It's not about you. It's about them. Be willing to do that. Show our experience. Get to know them. Show them that we love them. Share our values and realize that this younger generation who's saying, who do I trust with life's most important decisions? One of the best things that we can do for them is help them shape the values that are going to help them as a filter in making those decisions. See, leaving a legacy to me is really about transferring our values more than anything else we'll do. Money, buildings, whatever. It's our values that are really going to change that next generation. And so I have a program for you that I'd like you to consider. So, you know, I think about these things. Sometimes I talk about them. Aaron and I are writing about them. I thought, you know, you better make sure that you're doing this too. That always helps. And I had this idea. I said, you know what? I got it. I'm going to do Free Lunch Friday. This is where I get a free lunch. Now stick with me. So I went on social and I said, here's the deal. I'm available on Fridays to mentor anybody who would like to meet with me. It'll be an hour. You pick the restaurant near me in my little downtown, and I'll come meet with you for an hour. And we'll talk about whatever is on the table, and you pick up the tab for lunch. And then afterwards, I take a little social shot. I never share any details, but I post it with a hashtag that says Free Lunch Friday. And people started lining up in my little town for meetings. I took the summer off because I was traveling a lot. Free Lunch Friday. So I had people fly in from around the country for a mastermind with a software company that's in my office, and I got to speak to them, and I shared with them Free Lunch Friday. And the top real estate agents in the Minneapolis market went back, and they started their own Free Lunch Friday. And so I want to encourage you guys, I'm serious, consider doing something like a Free Lunch Friday. Because people will take you up on that. And this is like the duct tape exercise, because you have no idea how much people respect you in your network, because they haven't told you that. But when they reach out to you and they come to that lunch and they ask you questions, you're going to realize, holy cow, I had no idea the authority I was carrying around with me, and I wasn't intentionally using it. You guys can do this. So I want to talk a little bit about Peter and how Jesus reached out to Peter. So Jesus is talking to the crowds one day, and they're on this lake, and he says, it's going to be more convenient if I get in a boat so I can reach the crowds. And so he sees Peter. Of course, he knows Peter's there. He says, Peter, can I borrow your boat? Gets in the boat, speaks to the crowd. After the message, he looks to Peter and he says, throw in your nets over there. Peter says, I've been fishing all night. I'm a pro. Jesus says, throw in your nets. Throws in the nets, overflowing with fish. And all of a sudden, Peter gets a clue. He's like, this guy's from God. And he is just overcome. He says, depart from me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. Because when we have an encounter with God, the first thing we conclude is, I'm toast. I don't have what it takes to stand in front of such a holy and powerful God. But Jesus calls him to himself. And at the end of that interaction, he looks at him and he says, follow me. And Peter, that day, left everything and followed Jesus. Because Jesus was seeking out those people he could pull to himself. And then he walked with them, day in, day out, hand in hand. And there was a time when he looks at Peter and he says, hey, who do people say that I am? Well, some say you're the prophet, some say you're this, some say you're that. And he looks at Peter and says, who do you say I am? Peter said, you're the Christ. And he recognized Peter at that moment. He said something to Peter. He spoke destiny into Peter, looked him in the eye, and said, God revealed this to you, and I'm going to build my church on that. And he changed his name. You're Peter. You're a rock. Peter didn't see himself as a rock at that point. He saw himself as a sinner, and he was about to run, right? And Jesus spoke something into him, spoke destiny into Peter's life that showed up decades later. We'll talk about that. But he also wasn't afraid to rebuke him, because then Jesus started to explain to him, okay, now that you know the mission, I'm here to give my life. Peter tried to stop him and said, no, that's not the way this is going to go down, Lord. We've got another plan for you. And Jesus rebuked him hardcore, looked at him and said, get behind me, Satan. He said, you've got in mind the things of man and not of God. So he rebuked him. So he calls him. He recognizes him. He rebukes him. He walks with him. And it's the night before the crucifixion where Jesus is getting ready to go through with the great plan of redemption. And he's saying, I'm going to get betrayed, and all you guys you're going to scatter. You're going to deny me. And Jesus and Peter, I think Peter was kind of a CEO A type personality, maybe a high D on the disc profile, right? Peter's like, no, not me. I'm not going to deny you. And Jesus spoke some pretty hard truth to him there too. He said, yeah, you are. You're going to deny me 3 times this very night. And I'm sure Peter didn't believe that. But here we are 24 hours later, and Jesus is in the courtyard of the high priest where they're mocking him. They've got a rigged trial. They're beginning to beat him. And Peter's outside. You sure you weren't with him? Nope. Are you? I'm pretty sure you were with him. Peter starts swearing just to prove. No, I'm not one of those Christ followers. And it says right then the rooster crowed. And Jesus looked at Peter. And Peter looked at Jesus. And he knew that he had betrayed the very one who had called him and rescued him. Imagine that emotion that Peter was feeling. It said he was broken and he wept bitterly and he ran. And so Jesus fulfills his mission of dying on the cross for our sins. And the next scene we see with Peter is Peter has gone back to his old life. See, Jesus called him out of fishing, said, follow me. Peter says, the plan has gone sideways. I don't know what to do. I go back to my old life. And the Bible describes this scene where Jesus is cooking breakfast on the beach, and he calls out to them, and Peter says he knows, that's the Lord. Jumps in the water, swims to the beach. And this is where Jesus gives him the plan. But before he gave him the plan, he restored him. And see, that's something that a great mentor does, is you restore and protect those relationships. And he asked Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Peter's like, oh, Lord, you know I love you. Peter, do you love me? You know I do. And each time he said, I love you, Jesus said, feed my sheep. The 3rd time, Peter, do you love me? Yes, I do, Lord. You know I do. You know everything. You know I love you. He said, feed my sheep. Right there. The greatest mentor, restoring the one he's mentoring, and he's telling him, go mentor. Feed my sheep. Take care of the ones that I've given you. And then Peter, because he liked to talk a lot, he says, hey, Lord, now that we're restored, what about John? Jesus says, don't worry about John. What does that have to do with you? So the first thing he tells him is, feed my sheep. The second thing he tells him is, don't worry about the other guy. And isn't that relevant for us in this world? We spend so much of our time wondering about the other guy and what they're doing and what they're getting and their success or failures. Jesus said, don't worry about the other guy. And the last piece, the great call to Peter, which is the great call to us. He said, Peter, follow me. The very words he said to him when he first met him at the end of that day, follow me, are the words that as he's leaving to ascend to heaven. He says, Peter, follow me. He said, feed my sheep. Don't worry about the other guy. And follow me. He didn't give him a 28-page tactical plan for global evangelism. He didn't say, hey, someday I'm going to give you this big book, and I really want you to memorize it, and I want you to create frameworks, and I want you... Look how simple it was. He said, Peter, I'm going to build my church on you, and here's the game plan. Feed my sheep. Don't worry about the other guy. Follow me. Those are powerful lessons for us. But it gets better than that. Because after that, he commissions these people that he's been mentoring. And he says, here's the deal. I've been walking with you hand in hand for 3 years, and now it's time for me to go. But this is a good thing for you. And can you imagine hearing that? Imagine hearing if Aaron said, this analogy will break down at some point, but he said, hey, I'm done with ISI. You guys are all on your own. Just that emotion we would have. And I like Aaron a lot, but he's not Jesus. Imagine walking with Jesus for 3 years and he says, hey, I'm leaving, and it's a good thing for you because I'm going to send you the Spirit. And the Spirit is going to guide you in all truth. Remember how we talked about a mentor? The wonderful offer of our Savior is not only does he redeem us, but he gives us the Spirit that will be our mentor to guide us as we guide others. And then he commissions them after he's empowered them to go take the gospel message to the end of the earth. And what a beautiful story that is. So as we look to think about how is it that we mentor, I want you to remember, we're looking for experience and we're sharing experience. We're looking to get to know them and show people that we're willing to know them. Do they love you? Do they share your values? Those are the characteristics of a mentor that we need to embody. And then we think about our mission. Feed my sheep. Don't worry about the other guy. Follow me. And so I encourage you, if you don't have a mentor, be very intentional at seeking them out. I'd encourage you, I know you're part of a peer networking group here. Be willing to throw the flag. Be willing to go deep. And if you're at a point in your life and you're like, this is all great, but I don't feel like I know Christ personally. I don't feel like I have that thing that I sense that some of you guys might have. I would encourage you, look deeply into the things of Christ because Christ is the great mentor, and starting a mentoring relationship with the greatest mentor of all would be the best thing that you'll ever do. Thank you.